Welcome into the Odds and Audibles podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack. We're all on the show. It's our first game preview, game prediction podcast of the season. It could be the first of 15 or 16 or 17 of these things. We don't know. The 2024 football season is days away for Oregon. They host Idaho at 4:30. Kickoff on the Big Ten Network. Hope you don't have Comcast because it sounds like that might be an issue if you do and you don't have the Big Ten Network. Guy Haberman, Yogi Roth, Rhett Lewis, three very familiar names calling this game from Pac-12 Network, now working for the Big Ten Network. But guys, it's here. Oregon, Idaho. It's not as, I guess, star-studded as 2 years ago when Oregon played Georgia. It's not like it's a little bit different from last season, but similar in the same ways of opening against Portland State, an FCS opponent, a team that's supposed to be good at that level. Idaho's going to be a top 10 team. They made the playoffs, but they got gutted by the portal. They lost their quarterback to Oregon State. Their running back, I think, is at Utah. Their star linebackers at UCF. They've lost talent. We'll see how good they are, but in reality, it shouldn't be close, even if they're talented.
What's the line again, Jared? It was like 44.5.
44.5, yeah. I can double check that as we speak, but that was the last line.
That feels
pretty high.
Fair.
Yes.
Right? I mean, and again, the way I've kind of framed this all week is Oregon is the third-ranked FBS team. Idaho is the seventh-ranked FCS team. And that just speaks to the difference in caliber from levels. There's a huge gap here. And I don't think there's an FCS team out there that would really challenge Oregon. I don't think there are all that many FBS teams that will challenge Oregon this year. And we'll see. Oregon will obviously play a couple of those in the regular season and maybe some in postseason play. But this is an Oregon team that we've talked all offseason about the depth and the talent. We'll get an opportunity to kind of see that all and finally on display on Saturday. I'm fired up. And as we've talked about all week, I just want to see some football.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to the most. No change in the line, still 44.5, so no surprise there. But like Erik mentioned, that sounds about right. Little do we forget that last year Oregon beat one of the better FCS teams 81-7. So, a 44.5 point spread isn't outlandish. But I think going into this, I think the outcome has already been decided. Idaho's going to try their best, but I don't know if that's going to be anywhere close to good enough. And as Erik ended his thing, I'm just excited to see some football and see what this team looks like on the field because, we heard a lot about it, talked to a lot of people about it, saw it in the spring game, but they've added so many kids through the summer going into fall camp that I really just want to see what this all kind of looks like. And then just see what Oregon's kind of identity is through the first game of the season and then see if that's going to be what it looks like for the rest of the year or if that was just kind of a one-off.
Couple history notes against FCS openers. Jared pointed out they went 81-7 against Portland State last season. In 2017, they played Southern Utah and they put up 77 and gave up 21 points. 16 UC Davis, 50. It's the lowest, 53-28. And we obviously know why that was because that team wasn't very good. But the reality is Oregon's going to score a bunch of points. And the 44.5 point spread, it's you look at it and say, okay, do you think Oregon's going to score more than 56, 60 points? Yes, then they're probably going to cover the game because they're not probably going to give up more than 18 points in this football game. Maybe, depending on how long Idaho keeps their starters in and Oregon puts their sixth-string defense into this game. How quickly that happens.
Do they have a sixth string?
I don't know. I'm sure they do.
That's a lot of guys.
Dan Lanning says he prepares for all situations.
That would be a different one. 18 points would be a real bummer.
Yeah.
It would. And just to give we'll in future weeks against a little better competition, we'll go deeper into the opposition. Just some touchdowns in Idaho to run through. This is a offensive line that returns, some defensive linemen that return that were really good at the FCS level in the Big Sky last year. I think they've got a couple all Big Sky caliber defensive linemen back. They are very different in the skill positions and in the secondary. Offensively, new quarterback, Jack Lane from the state of Oregon. Excited to get a kid from Lake Oswego. I'm sure it means a lot for him to be back in the state. Has had one career start. It went really well last year, but it was against Idaho State. think he had like 6 touchdown passes, 6 incompletions. It was a really good outing. This is a totally different ball game for him to step up. As you mentioned, Giovanni McCoy is now at Oregon State, where he's their starting quarterback. So that was the guy that was leading this offense last year. And if he was leading the offense this year, maybe you'd feel different. Top 4 rushers are all gone. Top 3 receivers are all gone. It's a very different offense. This was a great offense at the FCS level. I'm sure it'll probably be a great offense again at the FCS level, but this is Oregon and this is a different level. So to Matt's point about like, if Oregon gets to 60 points, they're probably going to cover the spread. I don't think there's any question about that, because I would be really surprised, honestly, if Idaho is able to find the end zone maybe once, but definitely twice, just because for a lot of these guys, like we talk a lot about Oregon's changes here in the offseason. They're replacing a lot of guys, but they're bringing in kind of known commodities. For Idaho, if you look through it, this is like elevating a guy who's never really played before. Hey, this guy missed all of last year with a knee injury. Now he's your starting running back. That's kind of what you're looking at.
Yeah, they're taking a lot of flyers, and that's what you have to do with the program at that level. So it makes 100% sense. Oregon's obviously, replacing people who leave in the draft. So that's a good start for guys who are probably going to be drafted in next year, or just don't, or are somebody who might be an Idaho Vandal player who was excellent and All-American at that level, and then wants to go see if he can hang with the big boys, like kind of like Jay Harris. So it's just a different level of talent and standard. For like some of my research on Idaho, I went through like their PFF grades, because they did actually have some. So I thought that was interesting, and like all the snap counts and stuff. And like Eric, like you just ran through, I won't go again, but anybody who was good last year per PFF, which, whatever you want to think about them, not there anymore. It's pretty much like that simple. Their O-line has a lot of experience, and I think that'll help them tremendously during FCS play. I don't think it's going to matter too much on Saturday. I think that's going to be maybe Idaho's biggest thing that they got going for them, and it's not going to matter at all. So it's going to be like, I don't mean to like beat a dead horse here, but it's just, this is it. This is an FCS opponent against one of the best teams in the country. This is what, like, when years ago, when the Alabama era was really in its prime, and you check the score and it'd be like, Southeast Missouri State, no disrespect, 63-4 against Alabama. And you're like, there goes Saban again. That's kind of what this is going to be like for Dan in Oregon.
2 safeties?
2 safeties. 2 safeties.
Wow. Yeah. I'd be a little disappointed if that happened.
Yeah, that'd be something to write about.
Probably be snap issues, to be honest.
Probably. That kind of goes right into the next topic. Injuries. Let's get up to speed here. That's probably the biggest storyline too, of the Bedford injury and what happens from the fallout of that, but other injuries as well.
Well, I can't think of a time I've been more surprised to see a player entering a practice than Matt Bedford yesterday. Yeah, that was so weird. I mean, I'd written him off of like, maybe we'll start seeing him again in like 2 weeks or something, and then we won't see him on the field till after the bye, but he's out there. Dan certainly didn't like have a whole lot to say about it.
Strange stuff. Yeah.
There's kind of a weird dynamic in that interview. But yeah, Matt Bedford at practice didn't really do anything we watched. Was in cleats, which is kind of interesting. Doesn't sound like he's going to be available this week for sure, but like maybe he's available by the second or third game. Maybe you get him back in Hunt Conference play. I have no idea. Like this could also be hey, he wants to just kind of be out here. He's not doing much type of thing. But that was really strange to me and really unexpected. Our photographer Jason Fairchild was like turned the wrong way, and I actually slapped his lens to be like, no, over there, because I was so surprised that he was at practice. But yeah, that's interesting. We know now Dakota Fields is dealing with. Did Dan said a knee injury, right, Jared?
Yep. He did. Yeah, he actually specified,
which is unusual for Dan. That
unusual. So that means that
it's bad.
That's bad news. It's bad news.
So yeah, I don't think we'll see the true freshman corner, who we're all, I think, pretty excited to see this at some point this year. We might not see him really at all this season. We'll see. Mikhail Gardner, we got an update, I think about a week ago.
Yeah. Same
deal. Sounds like that's pretty significant. We saw him around the facility. It didn't look great. And then a couple of guys that Dan kind of wrote off on Monday, Jaleel Florence, Dave Iuli. Doesn't sound like we'll get to see either of them. And then Gary Bryant is in the could be available category.
Yeah. Could be.
Yeah, I think Iuli, Florence, and Gary are all kind of in that could be. Maybe not Iuli, but they don't need him. And they might not need them until conference play. And then that'll be, ultimately that'll be up to like Dan and the training staff. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is Bedford is just that he was back at practice. I don't think it means anything for week 1. I don't really think it means anything for non-conference. If I were them and they're comfortable with Charlie Pickard and Poncho and Marcus Harper as the interior, no reason to bring him back. Just let him sit, let him get ready for Big Ten play, make sure that he's 100%. I think that kind of leads us into Charlie Pickard if we want to talk about him and just what that situation looks like. From footnote to lead paragraph, Charlie Pickard is going to be like one of the more watched players on the field going into Saturday. And literally nobody on earth would have guessed that going into the season because of the people that Oregon brought in, the talent that they've returned. Like, who would have thought about Charlie Pickard? But he's going to be rather important. And it sure seems like he's going to be the starting center on Saturday. Again, Dan was non-committive at our Monday press conference. Just, hey, you'll find out on Saturday just like the rest of us. And it's like, all right. But from talking to Charlie yesterday and talking to Poncho, who was in the center competition, sure seems like Poncho's pretty comfortable playing right guard and having Charlie Pickard at center. So I think that's how it's going to be.
It's a guy that had some FCS offers. I think Oregon State offered him out of high school as well, and he chose to turn it down and to walk on at Oregon. I know Erik wrote the story on it, and it's a story we've kind of already seen play out, and maybe it plays a similar way, maybe it doesn't. We don't know, and that's probably the intrigue here. But it's one we've seen before.
Yeah, there's some real Ryan Walk parallels, and we're not the ones making those comparisons. Charlie basically volunteered. Like, this is the guy he said he was one of the most important people in his life. And for those who don't understand the background, Charlie played with Ryan Walk for 2 years as Ryan's career came to a close at Oregon and as Charlie's was getting started. And they kind of both similar deal here. In-state guys maybe could have played different, at different places if situations were a little different coming out of high school. Instead, they chose to stick it out and play at Oregon, and both have like just a lot of admiration for the state and for the program. I got a little goosebumps kind of hearing those kind of stories. Like, this just means something different to a kid like this. And as another person who's from the state and obviously cares a lot about this football program, it's cool to see a player on the team talk about it in those terms because, you go through the roster, there's not a lot of Oregon here. This has become a national recruiting brand. And you look at not even a lot of the guys are West Coast anymore. Like the defense this year, I was thinking about it last night, Jared, like 7 or 8 of the starters are probably going to be guys that aren't from the West Coast when you just kind of break it down.
Good.
Yeah. And that's not a bad thing. I'm just saying
it's not, man.
It's not. I mean, that means the program's getting better, but in this instance, it was cool to hear that and all that from Charlie. And now we see what this looks like because he's physically like 6'4", 310 is what I think they list him at, something like that. Like, that checks boxes to play center. He's been somebody the last couple of years we've noted in the practice report is like kind of working at center, getting some opportunities. The team loves him, right? That was the other thing that stuck out. Like, that
was the big one for me is everyone was just like all in on Charlie Pickard.
They love this guy. And so there's a real belief, and he even kind of alluded to that of like, I know I've got great support here from my teammates and players calling him the backbone or the heart and soul of this room. And kind of just, it seems like this is a really cool story. And now we see if it has a happy ending ultimately, because we don't know. We haven't really seen this guy play. I think he played like 60 something snaps last year. None of it was in high leverage situations. And now he's the number one center, it seems, entering the season. And there's a bunch of things we can talk about, maybe about what this means long-term for this season, because it sounds like Bedford's coming back. What are they going to do? But just kind of in the moment here, I'm just kind of excited to see what this looks like and to see if this is going to be another Ryan kind of story, because that was one of my favorite kind of elements of those runs the last Mario years. And then the first Dan year was just that there's some guys that had been around the state that really cared about it. And that kind of means a little something different.
Yeah, I think it's exactly like almost an identical parallel to Ryan Walk, just other than one's going to be playing center, one's going to be playing guard. And Ryan Walk played center at points when Alex Forsyth was down with an injury. I think it's a great story. I think it's a lot of fun. I'll be interested to see like what happens ultimately if Bedford comes back. Like maybe Charlie is what Ryan Walk was, a very, very, very serviceable interior offensive lineman who may not have like the same physicals and the intangibles as some of the higher rated recruits, but sure as hell gets the job done on the field. And that's what I think we're all hoping for, whether you're a fan of the story or a fan of the team. You want Charlie Pickard to succeed and do well out there on the field. And if he does so well enough that when Matthew Bedford comes back and kicks somebody to the bench, then great. That just means that Oregon's offensive line is deeper and talented than people had anticipated going into the season. Kind of like what it was last year, where it's like, there's a lot of question marks around the offensive line, but then in week 4, you're like, oh wait, no, there's not. There's not a lot of questions here, and they have Poncho and Dave Iuli off the bench. So I think it's a good story. I really think that probably only positives can come from this. Of course, there are always negatives on every outcome, but I think there's a lot more higher probability for a positive to come out of this, and I'm really excited to see Charlie get to work. Had a Dartmouth offer. Good for the guy, according to 247sports.com. So, again, turned down all these opportunities to go and actually play at a D1 school or an FCS school to stick here at Oregon for the last couple of seasons, which is, good on him.
Eric, to not fully project out the rest of the season, but also like these next couple of games when Bedford can't play are going to be huge for Pickard. And to answer your question, like if there's no snap issues at all and the offensive line looks really, really good, I think it becomes a Bedford versus Poncho and Pickard's just at center. Like you keep it there.
I do too. Well, because a couple things here. If it sounds like, I think this is what's going to happen. We actually got to watch 11 on 11 on Wednesday, and Pickard was the center and Poncho was the right guard, which was the first time we'd seen that sort of drill all fall, really since spring. So that was kind of further confirmation for me that this is what we're seeing. But to the point of like, I would think if Poncho was clearly the best center, and this was more about finding the best 5, and this is a short-term solution, you just put Poncho at center because he needs these reps really badly, right? And so I agree with you. Like my question is going to be like, if Charlie nails this and is great, I agree. I think we come out of whenever Bedford returns going, it's a Bedford versus Poncho for the right guard spot. Like that's where my head would be at least, which is interesting because I didn't really think there was a scenario where Poncho wouldn't be in the starting 5 going into the season. It just felt like he was solidified there. And I'm going to guess regardless, if he's not in your 5, he's your number 6 and he plays 20-25 snaps like he did last year. I think he's going to have a role. Yeah. But that's kind of where my head's at too. And, I'd be really curious to kind of get a feel for why Charlie over Poncho at center, because we kind of have highlighted this too. Was this because Poncho's just not cutting it there, or because Pickard's kind of the better solution over Strother at right guard? Like, there's just some kind of questions about what's going to go behind this. But ultimately, I'm kind of the belief that once Bedford's back, like Pickard's probably just the guy the whole way, unless he shows he shouldn't be.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, no, 100%. And then the way people talk about Poncho, I think I don't know. We're just projecting at this point and all hypotheticals. I think there's a chance it could be like a Bedford versus Harper conversation, which would be even more wild because Harper's been great the last 2 seasons, but you just kind of hear about how physical Poncho is and just his potential ceiling as a guard. You're like, I don't know how you could take him out of the lineup. But again, we're just projecting. This is all hypothetical. We just Oregon has to get through the first game first, and then we'll see if all of this stuff still belongs as a storyline afterwards.
All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll go into some of our bigger storylines that we highlighted on the website, DuckTerritory.com, for this game. All right, welcome back to the Odds and Audibles podcast. Storyline time. Let's go Eric first, Jared, and then I'll wrap up with mine.
Well, mine was already what we just kind of talked about.
Sure.
So, I mean, I'll keep it pretty quick here. I just want to see how good Charlie is. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. If Charlie is equipped for this job, and again, I don't know if we're going to learn how equipped he is until you start playing a little better competition. But if it's not a situation where there's clear confusion and the pre-snap stuff is like all over the place, and like I said, there's 4 points scored by Idaho and they come on snaps through the end zone. Like if it's just pretty clean football, I really do think Charlie might be your guy all season. And so that's kind of where I'll be just really focused on what he does. And I hate to make a huge deal about this, but what else am I supposed to pick on the offense to focus on, really? I mean, I guess if Dylan Gabriel's terrible, that would be a huge concern. If there's a bunch of fumbling issues, you go, oh gosh, Carlos Loughlin never let these guys fumbles. What's going on with Rashad? But the reality is Oregon is so talented at quarterback, at running back, at receiver, and at tight end. The reason, because I know we've gotten comments of people being like, why are we talking about these guys so much? It's because where else are we supposed to be focused when everything else is so good? You know, we're just trying to find the areas that maybe need to be focused on. And for me, it still remains how Charlie does at center.
Yeah, I agree. There's just not a lot of other glaring holes. Like I remember, weeks ago on this podcast, it's like, I think one of the biggest defensive concerns is like, who's the fourth linebacker? It's like, okay, good. So, yeah, the offensive line, the interior is obviously like the biggest question mark heading into this game, and it is a question mark, but it's not as big as other question marks have been in years past. My biggest storyline heading into this game is to see what Oregon's team identity is this year. We all remember in 2021 when Mario Cristobal famously did not showcase his whole playbook against Fresno State to go to Ohio State. Oregon does not, this version of Oregon with Dan Lanning, does not hold back like whatsoever in their first couple of games of the season. Like other than the game against Georgia, where you had absolutely no semblance of an idea of what this team was, when Oregon has played these little cupcake teams or even the spring games where you're like, that was really good. I wonder if that continues. Or it's like, oh, that was a kind of a question mark. I wonder if this continues. These things have kind of continued, at least in what I've been perceiving the last couple of years. Like when you go back to the spring game 2 years ago and the offense was incredible and the defense couldn't stop a nosebleed, you're like, oh, it's the offense. And then you go into the season, you're like, maybe the offense is really good, but the defense was also a struggle fest. Last year's spring game, you go into that, you say, wow, the offense didn't look great. Maybe the defense has improved. Or it's like, oh, maybe the offense hasn't improved. It's like, no, the defense has improved. So, and then against Portland State last year, you're like, wow, this is the best of both worlds. Offense is doing great. The defense let up one scoring drive and then shut down everybody the rest of the year. Maybe that's how it goes. Maybe that's not how it goes. Well, kind of turned out to be that's exactly how it went, where the offense was great and the defense would have some moments, but overall was really, really good. So I'm going into this game just to kind of see what I think the identity of the team will be. And I know that's kind of like a very broad blanket statement to have in the first game of the season against an FCS opponent. However, I think it's kind of been the case in the last couple of seasons, at least under Dan Lanning, where they don't hold back. It's like I'll have a pretty good idea of what the offense will look like, what the defense will look like, all in week one. And that's kind of how Georgia and Alabama have been and Ohio State have been the last couple of seasons, where it's like, we're going to put everything on tape and you guys just can't stop it. Or we're going to put everything on tape and you guys just aren't going to scheme up an offense that can do this or beat our defense because our talent is too good. Our schemes are too good. I understand what you're going to do better than what you're going to do. Like, I think that Oregon's just going to show it all in the first scene, and I'm just kind of excited to see that.
I hope that happens, because that leads into mine, where I kind of am more interested in seeing who fits in where and what the combinations are once the starters get pulled. Whether that's the first possession of the second half or midway through the third or sometime in the fourth quarter. Like Erik said, we don't get a good look oftentimes of 11 on 11 or even 11 on air at practice. And so we don't, we hear things, we talk to people, we get a good sense of where it's at, but there's nothing that beats the actual answers to the test. And that's what we'll get on Saturday is who's the second string linebackers, who, what makes up receivers 4, 5, and 6. I'm not really worried about 1 through 3. Or is it really going to be Roger Salapaga as the fourth tight end, or do they only play 3? Really, in big minutes. We'll get some of those answers in this game, and if we don't, boy, there's bigger problems at hand. But for me, it's almost more exciting for me once the game is essentially over and they're now giving their second groups guys more opportunities to play and continue to evaluate them than it is the actual first half of the game. Just because, to Jared's point, like we know what Oregon's going to be from an identity standpoint, maybe not all of it, but like we know they're damn good, and we're going to see that really quickly. But it's what's the depth behind the starters look like.
We should note, and again, I don't want to make too much out of what we watched in practice, but Dante Moore was the second quarterback that took the field. He was with the yellow offense. Green was the first group, yellow was second. I'm not surprised really by that, but what does that mean for Saturday in terms of, obviously we expect him to enter first, but like how much, and we're never going to get Dan to talk about this because he hates talking about this sort of thing, but like, are we going to see Dante and Austin Novosad get roughly the same workloads, or will they be a situation where Dante gets like 4 or 5 drives and Austin gets 1 or 2 at the very end? Like, I don't know. Like, right. That's kind of the type of thing, to build off Matt's point, that I'm curious about, because it seems, based upon what we saw yesterday, that Dante's the right pick to think of who will enter, but it's also like how long and what kind of opportunity do each of these guys get? And what does that mean for the rest of the season? I think a lot of people expect Dante to be the long-term answer here. Maybe we get an opportunity to see some of that on Saturday. I'm just curious to see if it's like a couple of drives or if they really give him like a quarter or so to kind of get rolling.
Yeah, I think the depth question mark was my number 2 storyline, and just to see like what the defensive line rotation looks like. The safety rotation I think is interesting. I'm not sure what they do like behind Taishim and Kobe Savage. I think that'll be kind of interesting to see. Like, is it Woodyard? Is it Flowers? Is it all these other guys who could play there? That's definitely up there, at least for me on the defensive side. Like, Eric, you do offense, I do defense. Like, that's like a big question mark in the safety room, and then the interior defensive line. I just have like a bunch of questions on like who's after Amari Washington and Keon Ware-Hudson. It's like, we thought it was going to be Michael Gardner, then he's hurt. He's going to be down for a while, said Dan Lanning. And it's like, all right, then who's up next? Is it Terrence Green? Like, is it Tione Gray? Is it one of the new true freshmen? Is it Aiden Vreeland? Like, I have no idea. So I think that'll be fun to watch too.
All right, let's go into our predictions. We've changed it up. This year, we aren't going to do individual selections of bold picks. We're all going to be picking off prop bets, and then we'll make our score predictions at the very end. So let's start at the top. Team prop bets, over under Oregon, 5.5 players scoring a touchdown. I said over. Do you want me to just read them off, or do we want to go through it?
I didn't know if you wanted to like give a sentence or something. I
think all 4 running backs are going to score touchdowns, and then that just leaves 2 touchdown passes happening, and I doubt it's going to be the same guy.
I went under, but I probably shouldn't have, because if you do the math, I predicted, we'll get to the game scores at the end, like 9 touchdowns, and probably if there's 9 touchdowns scored in this particular sort of game, there'll be more, but I went under, and we'll see. I'm kind of expecting like early on it could be a glut for a guy or two, so I went under.
I went over. I had the same thought process as Matt. I was like, all these running backs are probably going to score, and then I just need Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson to catch a touchdown. I think that might happen.
Over under Oregon, 600 yards of total offense. I think Oregon scores a bunch of points, so I think that's going to happen. The only way it doesn't is if Oregon's defense, special teams gets interceptions or big returns that shorten the field significantly, where it's like, hey, you only need 38 yards to score a touchdown, which could happen, but I still think they're going to go over 600.
Over. I feel pretty good about that. I think that's pretty straightforward. I guess my only concern would be like maybe some of the second or third units have a hard time moving the ball, and there's an ugly period in the second half where there's a lot of punting and not a lot of yards gained, but I think they'll go over.
It's an over for me. They had 10 games last year where they went over 500 yards, and 7 of those were against Power 5 level schools. So they had 729 yards last year against Portland State. They're going to go over.
Over under Idaho 3.5 turnovers. I said under. If it was 2.5, I would have taken the over. I think they're going to get 3. I just don't feel confident about 4.
Yeah, I'm predicting 3. I am doing my Skopil column again for those who like the column. For those who don't, eat my shorts.
Too bad. Yeah.
Yeah. But one of them is I think there's going to be 3 transfer players forced turnovers. So I'm going 3, but that's under. 3 is less than 3.5, so I'll take the under.
Yeah.
Quick math. I went over just to be different because why the fuck not? That's kind of just basically that.
Offensive individual prop bets now. Over under Dylan Gabriel 25 attempted passes. I say over. I think they're going to let it air it out to Jared's point earlier about they're going to show the whole thing. They're going to be aggressive.
I went under. I think it could be really close to that number, but ultimately I think you want to see what the backups have, and if you create separation early, it shouldn't be difficult to create that separation. It just depends on how many drives maybe you want to give Dylan since he's new with this offense, but I'm going under.
I went under as well. I think Oregon's going to run for a ton of yards. And I also think that Gabriel isn't going to need 25 passes to get to a certain number threshold that's going to take him out of the game. I think that he's going to be able to hit Tez and Evan Stewart and Trayshawn or Gary Bryan if he plays for, deep yardages, like 20, 30 yards down the field. I think that's going to be kind of the offense that Oregon orchestrates this year. So I have under, although I could see it going over, but it's all also just time dependent. How much does he play?
Over under Noah Whittington 70 rush yards. This one and my selection of the 600 yards of total offense, I felt like were like the easiest ones to hit for over. I'm taking over. I think to Jared's point, Oregon's going to run the ball a lot. They're going to have a lot of success. Whittington, it might be a case where he only needs like 7 or 10 carries to get there. And then he's done. But yeah, I think he gets 70 rushing yards.
It's an easy over for me. I do have the only caveat is like, what's his health level? How much they want to play him? But I mean, from what we've heard, he's feeling great, and he seems to be. He was taking part with the second or the yellow offense, I should say, on Wednesday. So I think he's full go, and I think he'll get 70 or more.
I think if Whittington is full go, like Eric said, I think he could get 70 or more in one rush. Like I that's the thing. Like I was looking at last year against Portland State because that's the closest opponent that Oregon has played to Idaho in the last couple of years. Bucky Irving had 4 rushes for 119 yards last year. He averaged almost 30 yards a rush. So I think this is going to be pretty clear that they're just going to run the ball a ton. I think at one point this game is going to get like incredibly out of hand where they're just going to hand the ball off a lot. And maybe Whittington isn't in during those moments, but that might start pretty soon. So I think they'll go over pretty easily.
Over 1.5 touchdown passes caught by non-starting Duck wide receivers. I said over. I'm going to bank on Justice Lowe and Kyler Casper catching a touchdown pass in this game.
I feel like Justice Lowe caught a touchdown pass in every scrimmage that they had based upon that team out west. Like if you watch that, he was just always in the end zone. So I also went over. I like him to get there. Maybe Jerian Dickey does the fun thing and we all get really excited. That would be good.
Yeah, I went over as well. I just think that Idaho's secondary is going to be in hell all day long. And it's not going to matter if it's the first string, second string, third string, or even Darian Anderson. Like I think that somebody's going to be catching a touchdown pass.
Defensive individual props, over under defensive player with 7.5 tackles. This may have been the hardest one for me because I really wanted to do over. But I think the defense, especially at linebacker, like they don't have a ton of depth. So like Bossa and Jacobs, once this game's done, like they're going to get out. They're not going to play. So I went under, but I'm really close to saying over.
8 tackles in like a half would be a lot for somebody. And that's kind of what I'm thinking here is I don't know if anyone's going to play more than a quarter and a half consecutively. And so I went under. I bet my guess would be there's like 4 or 5 guys at 5 or 6 tackles or 7 tackles. You know what I mean? Like there's just a bunch of guys in that category. No one gets over. We'll see. both Matt and I picked Jeff Bossa to have a huge tackle total for the full season. So maybe he gets. Maybe we need
it.
Did you as
well? We all did. Yeah, I had Jeffy over 100.
Okay, we all did.
Yeah. I went over. I'm the one who picked this line. I thought that you guys are totally right, where the linebackers, if this game gets out of hand, like Jeff and Justin Jacobs are probably going to come out. I just think that somebody's going to do it. I don't think it's going to be something that we predict. Maybe it's like Brandon Johnson or somebody, or it's Aaron Flowers just goes crazy in the second half or something.
That could very well happen.
I like
making a bunch of tackles.
I like that, and I like it being like a Flowers or a Woodyard playing a bunch and getting more opportunity and getting a lot of tackles. Like a guy they're going to factor into this year's rotation, just getting a little bit more run because he's new. I could see that.
I hope it's like some obscure, like Amari Washington, eight defensive tackles.
Amari Terrell.
Solomon Davis was a spring game standout. Maybe he does it again.
Yeah, love Solomon Davis.
Over under 1.5 sacks for Jordan Birch. I just don't think he's going to get enough opportunities, and I think Idaho's offense is going to be try to get the ball out quick so we don't get sacked.
They might try, but I think they're going to get sacked. I think there'll be some pressure. I also went under. I just think 2 or more sacks is kind of a lot.
I went under as well. I'm trying to very quickly bring up if anybody got a sack last year against Portland State, and it doesn't look like it. I don't know how factual that is, but I think Birch will probably get home at least once, but 2 times is going to be a lot, and I just don't think that they're going to play him that much.
Last one, over under 4.5 players with a registered tackle for loss. Just like Jared's pick for 7.5 tackles. I think because of so many guys playing, we're going to see 4.5 tackles or 5 guys get a registered tackle for loss. So I said over.
I should have looked this up because while Jared just brought up like against Portland State, there weren't a lot of sacks, maybe none. I think there were a ton of guys who got tackles for loss in that game. I want to say Oregon still finished double digits tackle for loss, and a bunch of guys contributed. So I'm going over. I think in these early games, Oregon's so disruptive. And I could see this being a decent number to hit most weeks just because, like, off the edge, you're looking at, like, a Tatum Tuioti, a Blake Purchase, a Mateo, MRN, Winston, Ledger Rushing. There's just a lot of names to throw out there who could be impactful. So I think over is a good bet.
There were 3 tackles for loss against Portland State.
Oh, gosh.
There were 3 tackles for loss, no sacks, no turnovers, no anything.
I thought they had a lot. I should have researched. My bad, guys.
Yeah. And that didn't stop me from going over as well. I think it'll happen. I think it'll also kind of depend on how much Oregon wants to send the dogs. Yeah. And that might happen a lot. That might not happen, or it might just happen because of the talent gap. But Matt, like you said, I think Idaho's going to try to get the ball out quick and really try to not let that happen. But we'll see. I went over.
Score predictions. Jared, why don't you go first, and Eric, and then I'll go last.
Sure thing. I got to remember what I predicted now. I have Oregon winning 63-10. I think that's maybe a little conservative. I thought about going. I originally had 56-7, so I upped it by just a hair. I don't really feel like I need to explain this one. I think at this point it's just kind of beating a dead horse. Oregon is the number 3 team in all of college football. Idaho is an FCS team. There you go. That's pretty much it.
We all, by the way, predicted margins larger than the most lopsided win in this series history, which is 51 points back in like 1965. So I'm also picking Oregon to cover by quite a bit. I didn't realize this when I put the numbers in, but I predicted a Mark of the Beast score. I have Oregon 66-6.
Well,
I don't know what that says. My bad. I just think, like, to really simplify this, like, Oregon's offense is what? Get the ball to their playmakers out in space. I think that the gap between the speed and athleticism and just skill sets in space, I think favors Oregon so much where, like, I wouldn't be surprised to see guys kind of running all over the place early on when it's especially the ones, and just, you know, even a spot where, like, hey, they actually covered Tez pretty well in the flat, but he made 3 guys miss, and now he's upfield 25 yards for a play that shouldn't have happened. So I think we'll see a lot of that. And frankly, we talked about Idaho's strength there probably being in the trenches. Oregon's really damn good up there too. It's not going to be a thing where there's a lot of resistance, I don't think, on either side. So 6-6-6.
I had the most points for Oregon, 77-10. Like Eric, I've got them winning by more than 60 points, which is an absurd number to think about, but I think it's really possible with the depth, the talent, the overall team speed that Oregon has. And to Jared's point that he made earlier, like, I don't think Oregon goes and says, sorry, we're beating you by 56 points. We're going to take it easy now. Like, no, they're going to be cutthroat. They're going to be aggressive. They're going to show stuff. And when the backups get in, I think this is one of the biggest things I like about Dan Lanning is when he pulls the starters, he does not go to vanilla dive, punt. They keep running their regular offense. And because of that, they're going to score a bunch of points. So I've got Oregon winning 77-10, blowout fashion for all three of our picks there. All right, we'll track this all season long, as we always do. Hope you guys enjoy the game on Saturday. Things to look forward to. We've got pregame coverage on DuckTerritory.com. We'll have a podcast breaking down the game afterwards. We've got a ton of content still to go up to preview the game and then also, obviously, to recap it. Hope you guys enjoy your weekend. Happy College Football Eve. And you're listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.